Welcome, everyone. We are so happy to open this month's live chat. Our topic today is going to be learning the language of flowers. We were brainstorming for an idea for a chat. We thought, oh, this is a really good one. For those of you who may not be on our list or fully aware, we are getting ready to start our next cohort of the FES practitioner training, which is very excited. We've been meeting with students this week and really looking forward to diving in to learning the language of the flowers. And we thought we would talk a little bit about the way we do it and some things that we've seen that maybe work really well and some things that maybe don't work as well. And you're really welcome to join in on the conversation. We would love to hear your voice. If you have something you would like to share, we invite you to go to the reactions button and raise your hand, and we will bring you in. And or if you are shy and don't like to put your voice and face on the recording, you are more than welcome to put your question or comment in the chat, and we would love to have you included in any way that feels comfortable to you. So, welcome everyone. And Ruth is here. And do you want to start off the conversation? We talked about it a little bit ahead of time. We'd love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, one of the things that for me has been so fundamental in the process of learning flower essence therapy is going beyond the descriptions in the books, which is where most of us begin and which is where I started as well. And encountering my first teachers who were each one of them in their own way bringing in an embodied experience and knowledge of each essence as a unique plant archetype in its expression. And by having that opportunity of resonating with how they were telling the stories about that plant and how eventually, in some cases, I had the fortune of actually going and meeting the plant. But in other cases, some of the plants grow in places that I'll never be able to hike myself all the way up to those altitudes, or in Alaska, in places where, even though I've been there, I don't think I'll ever be able to get to these particular places where these plants grow. But that experience of resonating with how these teachers embodied their connection with each one of these plants, it kind of brought it to life within me in a way that went beyond those lines of description. It can be used for this or for that, which are also always very helpful. But that presence, that living presence of each plant. So that is something that each teacher has really added to that through the different systems of essences that I've studied. And it's something that I hold so precious as part of the experience of learning.
Yeah, I have wonderfully vivid sense memories that were transmitted to me from Jane Bell and Steve Johnson. I have not been to Alaska. That's still on the bucket list, but I have these. They related the stories and the experiences of going to these places. Like flying on a mail plane and being dropped off for a week in the middle of the Alaskan outback, essentially, and going and work and making essences of plants. Like that is not on all of our ability to do lists. And still, I feel like I've connected with those plants because they've been so beautifully transmitted to me from, one person's experience to the next. And I think that's really the heart of it. Books and descriptions are one thing, but when you have the ability to meet a plant in person or even to meet it secondhand, you do create a lived experience in your own field that you can then relate to your clients and, explain to them what these essences are about and or for, or, all that. We'd love to hear from you joining in on this chat. How did you learn about the flower essences that you know and love in your heart. I'm sure a lot of us have made some flower essences, and that's always a great way of getting to know a plant, to actually sit and be with the plant as you work with the bowl. Some of those essences, which might be essences that we know from other systems that we've made ourselves, we have a really deep and embodied experience of working with that plant. Um, I recall, Ruth, you talking about how at FES you had the experience of making, what was it, the spreading phlox many, many years ago with a group of people. Yeah.
Yeah, and that those are kind of exemplary experiences that we get to have, when you happen to be in the right place at the right time when that plant is growing everywhere and you get to do the observation and feel immersed in the presence of that plant. And that usually happens alongside with an experience, which I will make a parallel with today. Kathleen and I are co-teaching a program that we have called Back Flowers in Contemporary Practice. And this week we're preparing the vervain and vine lesson. And as we dig in and do our research, we're also experiencing some of the patterns. So that's also part of the process, that some of the patterns become more activated, let's say, that are related to the plant that we are going to be focused on.
It's a really well-known, at least to me, this was part of Jane teaching me about making essences, is that everything that happens when you're making an essence is part of that remedy state. And so very often, even before I'm with the plant, I will start experiencing some stuff, whatever that stuff might be. Usually it's intense. What can I say? And yeah, when you are studying, when you're doing a deep dive into a plant, you do start to experience some of those constellation of dynamics that are part of that remedy state, and it's really useful to recognize that. That's certainly something that we've noticed as we've taught students in the practitioner training, that when we do these deep immersions into particular plants, of bringing through the photographs and bringing through on some level of visual experience of meeting the plant, is that they'll start to experience things in themselves shifting as well. Has anyone ever experienced that? I'd love to hear from. It's a small enough group. You can just pop your hand up or open your mic. We'd love to hear from you about your experiences one-to-one with plants. I know it's hard. It's everybody feels really shy.
I'll say hello.
Go for it.
Yes, this is my first time coming to one of these circles, so thank you for opening this up for us. I have been working with flower essences for probably 20 years now, but I haven't. Right now, I'm diving in for a much deeper study of them. So, one way that I worked, actually, I do energy work and I work a lot with spirit guides and helpers. So I had a dream message to go to the mountain where I live and make some essences. And that hadn't been on my radar or on my plan before. I do more with aromatherapy at that time. And I did it and I sat with the plants and I made the essences and I just had such beautiful connections and with the plants and the land in that area. And then I ended up going back seasonally and making what I called a layered environmental essence. So it was such a beautiful healing and opening experience for me. And I felt like the plants really walked me through some deep healing as I went through that year, going back each season and meeting different plants that were blooming. And I'm in Arizona, so our plants are different than many of the rest of North America. But it was a really, really very powerful experience. Very powerful.
Thank you for sharing your experience. Would you be so kind as to share which plant? Bring the plant in the room because this is part of the conversation. If
Oh,
there's one
wow.
particular plant that you want to talk about.
Well, I ended up doing one that's the way I did it too is I went out and I listened to what plants were calling to me, and I didn't necessarily know what plant it was. And I made the essence and I sat with it and I received the impressions. And then I went home and looked up for plant identification, which was such a cool way to do it because it validated, the just the intuitive impressions and communications I was getting. Cliff Rose was one that I really connected with beautifully. And that one to me, um, it helped a lot with heart healing, like vulnerability and heart healing and the ability. And I have no idea what the traditional teachings are around that one, but for me personally, it helped like with strength and being tough in a really good way. Strong and tough in a really good way around vulnerable heart areas. So that was one. Cosmos was another one that jumped up to work with me. And that field of cosmos to me was like the importance of community because it was just this huge field of cosmos and they were dancing in the breeze and the sunlight and they were like children laughing and playing and yeah, really beautiful experience.
Thank you for sharing that because I can really feel your heart having had that connection, being able to tell me about it. And all of us in this space, we're all getting a little hit of that experience from you. Thank you for sharing your experience. And I love to, if it's a new plant to me, to go in kind of cold, not knowing, not having done pre-research, because then you feel like you do have a better grasp on what you got, what sort of information or experience you had that, when you go back and confirm it, it's really affirming that you really got something real. Beautiful. Thank you, Carrie. Appreciate it. Julia, please.
Okay, hi. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, so it's interesting. So I was living in Australia for 3 years. And when I was there, I started making my own flower essences the way that they like called me to them. And it was such a special way to get to know the plants and the flowers and just the whole relationship with them. So the ones that I made, the first one was a plumeria frangipani, and that one, it's really interesting because I had wrapped, it was a tree in my courtyard, and I had wrapped it with fairy lights as an offering to the fairies to let them know that I would like to begin a relationship with them. And through a series of events that it was very clear they heard that call. And that essence is very much about magic and ancestral healing for me. And then I made one with a Queen of the Night flower. I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with that. I made one with a Banksia, which is an Australian plant, so beautiful. And then I had made a trip home to my family's farm in North Carolina, and there's a tree that held me throughout my entire childhood there, and it's a tulip poplar, and made a beautiful essence with that. And so I'm back in the U.S. now, living here, and I'm making blends for other people. And at this point, I'm using the Bach and the FES essences. But it's the relationships that I built with those four essences that I co-created that I'm able to better understand the blends I'm making for people now. Yeah.
Thank you. That's a really important story about how whether those are the ones you're using or not, that creating that connection, that direct personal connection to nature, in that way really gives you a lot of insight into using some of the other essences. I'd be interested in what has been your process of learning the Bach essences? Did you study in books? Did you learn from a teacher? What was your experience?
So it's been interesting. I started using them, I guess, off and on in my 20s, and I would, just kind of do that off and on. But then something happened when I was in Australia. And so then when I got back, it was mostly just books and, until it wasn't, when they started talking to me. And now they give me their names. And, yeah, so that's how it is now. But that's all linked to when I was making those essences in Australia. And it's connected to the flower divas. And so it's a relationship with them. But also books. I have a process where, I know in my heart my head, what I think it is. And then I meditate and connect with them. And then they tell me. So, yeah, I know that's kind of weird, but that's how it works for me.
Not weird in this space.
Okay. Yeah.
We're pretty
Right.
comfortable with that. Yep, that sounds about right.
Okay.
Everyone has their own process. And so it's really sweet to hear yours and to how you've come about it, because everybody's journey along that line of like getting to the place where the plants will start to speak to you is really different. And some people come at it from a different angle, but I'm really glad that you have your system and it really works beautifully for you.
Thanks.
Nicely done. Thank you for sharing your experience.
Yeah, and I just want to say thank y'all for what you're doing here. This is the first time I've been able to come to a live call, and I just love the community you're creating and what you're doing with the essences. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome in.
Thank you.
We're happy to create this space for everyone to be able to share on these topics that are too weird for the people you live with, maybe, or live near.
Yeah.
So we welcome in the weird. Y'all are welcome here.
Yeah, and one of the nice things is that amongst us, we have people who actually cultivate plants or, have this direct connection of growing them. We have people who love making flower essences. And we also have people who play different roles in this. Like for me, I feel that I tend to be more in the role of being the go-between, the translator that um, takes people to the plants and then brings the plants into the soul journey topics and issues and creates bridges between one thing and the other. Um, like more of a translator in a bridge role. Um, and so in one of the Q&A about the course that we're teaching, there was one person who was saying, well, I'm not so good at growing plants, but my mother is. But, I just love and feel so drawn to the flower essences. And that's absolutely fine. Not everyone is, like I'm happy to partner with Kathleen, who is that kind of person who grows plants and makes the essences.
It's such the world of flower essences is so rich with diversity. We have people that do all different kinds of things, are really interested in different things, and there's space for everyone in this garden. It's like whatever your process is, whatever your background and interests are, there's a space for you. And even maybe more important is that there's people out there who need you. They don't need whatever the standard flower essence practitioner is. They need you because you're a perfect fit for them. You're the sort of person that they can really connect with, and you could help them in a way that, maybe I couldn't, maybe Ruth couldn't. All of us have a really unique approach, and it's perfect because it really goes out and connects to people in their unique ways and with their specific needs, in our communities and elsewhere.
Now, I have to say that one of my passions is learning about the botanical families and what are the common threads between essence plants in one same botanical family. And when Carrie talked about working with the cliff rose, that I assume is a rosacea, and she was talking about the heart and being, strong and yet heart-centered. That is so much of what we find as one of the common threads in many essences that are in this same botanical family. So I could really feel that signature of the rosacea in what you were sharing about your experience with the cliff rose.
And that's one of the pieces that, from in my practice and in my experience, I'll often have personal relationships with somebody that's related to the plant, to the essence that's perfect. And so sometimes, like you were saying, Julia, like the plants will come to you when you're listening to your client. You'll be hearing it, and you'll be hearing like, oh yeah, and you'd be thinking, maybe one type of rose, like wild rose or something like that. And then when you get, this is my process. When I get off the phone, then I'm thinking, okay, wild rose, I pull it out and it's like, no, that's not it. And then I'm like, oh, maybe it's because it's somebody closely related that maybe I don't have a really tight personal relationship with, that can't call to me individually. But then I'm looking in the right area. I'm like, okay, who else is related to this? And then boom, that's exactly the right one that they needed. And it isn't, sometimes it's not even one that I know hardly at all. And it can be really fun to see those things pop up, because, Ruth, you and I have really extensive essence libraries. Doesn't mean we know every single one by heart. Not a chance. But there are ones that we know so well that they can introduce us to some of the others. That's my experience. I don't know. Has anybody else had that happen? Okay, just me. I'm a weirdo. I
I
acknowledge
have
it.
to in my work with
Okay.
clients. Yeah. I have more experience with the essential oils. I'm kind of moving into the essences now, but definitely the plants will boom, 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 as you're talking to a client. Oh, maybe this one, maybe that one. Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. Because there's so much richness in this field, and there's so many possibilities of essences that we can work with. Um, one of the things that we wanted to bring in is the sometimes when we first start getting started with essences, we learn the description. We learn, kind of the standard description of what an essence might be. And sometimes it's really hard to match that to, an actual human we have in front of us. And we'll feel like, okay, well, maybe part of this fits this person, but the rest of it doesn't fit them at all. And what do we do then? How do we get to the place where we can kind of know the essence as a person, as an individual, and recognize that, oh, okay, we don't, and this is something, Ruth, you and I were talking about, that aspect of not needing it to match 100% every single indication. I think that's something that you do in your practice as well.
Very much so. And I always like to think that the descriptions that go in the repertories and the books, they are helpful, but they're not really the plant. The plant is this unique living being that has been evolving over a long period of time, that has been going through all sorts of adaptations, and that has evolved and adapted to a certain environment. And so it has that intelligence to share Now, of course, it can be applied for this, for that, for that, for that, but that's us, creating a repertory. It's not really the plant. And so how can we be assured of that what's important is for us to get a sense of the signature of the plant, sometimes even through these descriptions, but knowing that the situation doesn't have to match. Perhaps it doesn't match any of those descriptions, and we just want that quality that that plant brings. And that's important, especially when we're working with clients, because they will read that thing and say, but I don't have this, I don't have that, I don't have that. Why are you choosing that for me? And perhaps they feel they're not really being seen when they see that description, which is a very legitimate feeling to have. And so if we're able to express what we sense is the quality that the plant is bringing, just that pure quality of the plant, then they will say, oh yeah, I can see how I can benefit from that. And that's an important part of the process of learning and communicating about the flower essences.
Sometimes I describe it as, every plant could have a book written about it. It could so many chapters. And sometimes when I'm explaining to a client, like, okay, if you happen to look up the description, this isn't going to fit you at all. But I'm putting this in your formula for something that's, 98 pages deep into this book. There are so many facets of these plants and these essences. The more we get to know them, the more we can see how they can, sometimes they're creating a supporting role. Sometimes they're creating a structural role in a formula that doesn't have, a matchy description with what the issue might be coming with. So there's so many different ways of working with these essences that we might not know about if we were looking strictly at the book and going, not a match. That can't possibly be helpful for the person. So sometimes it's really a surprise, the things that will come up, and you'll have to kind of think it through. I know I've had circumstances where I dowsed for something and I was like, what? How am I going to explain this one? And you kind of have to think it through and go, does it relate to any of these other essences? Is it here for a purpose? What do I know about its ecosystem? Maybe it has a role in the ecosystem that is really going to be helpful for this formula. Does anybody have any other ideas of some ways that they've been surprised about essences coming forward in a formula where they thought, oh, that couldn't possibly be right? And yet, if you trust it and offer it, you can be really surprised in the client's response, perhaps, or in the downstream response when they call you back and they tell you that something really crazy happened. And then you're like, oh, that's why that essence showed up in advance. How many of us here are working with clients? I mean, we might be talking about working with clients, but maybe we're also talking about working with family. Are we all, working with essences in some way, whether it's personal or family or with clients? Yeah. Yeah. Cool. There's so many different ways for us to engage with these plants. Let's go back a little bit to the personal the one-to-one experience that we can create through viewing images. This is certainly something that we have a lot of experience with. Oh, I see, Arnell, you have your hand up. Please jump in. We can get back to the image.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind of on the same thing, but it's been a path that just kind of popped up just relatively recently for me. And I started looking at Native American indigenous plants that for some reason, really called deeply to me. And I've started looking at, like, they call them by very, very different names than what we're used to calling them. And one was like, it's called thimbleweed. And I started looking at it, and the plant itself is a pretty delicate white flower with a center of yellow. And I looked at it, this has got to be an Asteraceae family. So I've been going backwards because they listed as what plant it is and the indigenous name for it and what they use it for, but they don't give the family. And I started looking at, and they have ones that, I mean, some of them are familiar to us, like lupine, but then they have another one called turtlehead. And I started looking at these because I thought, I wonder if they have some of the same qualities of some of the other Asteraceae or the lupines, or and some of the now I may be saying this right, the Papaveraceae, which are the poppy family. And so I started looking into that, and it's really been calling me. So I kind of been sketching them out. I haven't seen any, except that we just recently took a cross country from Wisconsin back to California briefly. And I started looking in these areas that we hadn't driven through before. And did I see some of these out in those areas of the mesas and things like that, except that we didn't get a chance because we got hit with a snowstorm coming across New Mexico. But that's been something that's been calling me. And it's like, why am I so interested in looking at these weird little plants that I've never seen? And I may never see them again because some of them are just, and what they use them for. And some of them had sacred points and some of them had healing. But what was it that they found in those different plants and things like that that were important to them and used? And I mean, it's just been really interesting to see some of them. But I mean, sumac is one that they use frequently, and trying to find, and that comes like I think in the Asperaceae family, kind of like. So I'm starting to learn new flowers, new plants, and my big call now, Ruth, is I'm trying to find what family they go to because I want to know what family they belong to. Then I'll venture down further. But
It's so cool, isn't it? Yeah.
it is. So, I mean, this whole took a whole different path for me of what I was thinking, working with flower essences, with pets and things like that, which I'm doing. But really to kind of all of a sudden, like, I want to categorize some of these indigenous ones that were important to where we are and who we are. And I mean, it's wonderful to think, culturally, we had a lot of the Bachs that were European flowers, but what was it here as we walk this ground? Should we be looking at calling, and which ones were grounding and which ones were spirit lifting and which ones were magical to them? So that was kind of where I'm gone, but I'm probably off topic from our plant thing.
No, not at all. This is it. And I also see it like it awakens the detective in us, or the genealogist, etc. So we really want to find, the connections and the paths and yeah, the curiosity. And what's so satisfying in this work is that there's always more to discover. I mean, of course, life is about learning. We always keep learning, but this study of the plants and the essences in the way it's multi-layered
Yeah.
and there's all these correlations,
And
it's satisfyingly endless.
wonderful. And I started looking like why did they pick certain ones for different people that they wore in their medicine bag? Not everybody wore the same plant. And it takes it back to what we're doing with flower essences. For them, they carried an actual piece of those dried flowers or plant with them for strength or for grounding or for, confident, whatever they were lacking or wanting to increase and enhance. And it really made me delve, like you said, the detective in there. And I was so happy when I looked at myself. I thought, oh, I think that's an Asteraceae. And then when I looked it up and it was, I went, yes, yes.
And
And you'd
you
like
make it,
that.
it sounds like a cool plant, and it's really fun to be able to start learning that language of the visual language of what this family looks like, because like you say, you can just be going out and you're like, I think that one looks like it could belong to this family, and it gives you a learning pathway rather
Yeah,
than there's a lot of plants out here. Where do I even start?
it was just so confidence building. And I was thinking of Ruth because I thought, though it's not as multi-layered as the Shasta daisy, the color and the vibrant yellow in the center, though it's just single petal, um, I just like, I thought, wow, look at this plant. You know, I'd like to sometimes see it in person.
It's beautiful. And what you were mentioning of the use in a pouch, in a bag that you would carry to support your spirit. In this way, we can offer the essences as, a type of healing plant. And also in the medicine traditions, these plants, if you look down through the list of all the things they did, it was a lot of things. So they didn't just do one thing. So in that way, the essences have this capacity to meet us in many, many different ways that might not be that primary listing of, like this is the positive quality and this is the negative quality. It might be something, deeper in the description that it might have to offer. So that's a good reminder. Yeah. Wow. Thank you. And I
There's
love
always
how,
some plant that calls us, right? The plumeria, Julia was talking about her connection and making the essence of the plumeria. And I keep wanting to ask what she found out about it because I used to have it in my garden in Brazil. And one of the things that I was very impressed about the plumeria was the fact that you can actually transplant a whole grown tree without a root ball and just put it on the soil and it will take root and continue to produce flowers. So I thought that was absolutely fascinating. But yeah, I never learned a whole lot about its flower essence except for one that the bush essences has that's quite specific in terms of color. Yeah.
yeah, Julie, if you'd like to share your thoughts on your plumeria, we'd love to hear it. And then we'll get to Joni.
Um, hmm. So that particular plant is very, very personal for me. It was that particular one that was in my courtyard, and it's linked with an ancestral guide of mine. And through like Ceranos, the man in like the Celtic tradition with the antler head. Um, and so there's I that plant, it's magical. Like it's true magic, and very connected to the fairies. And yeah, I mean, so I could have like an offline thing with you sometime because it's kind of involved, but those are my two things: are how magical it is and that it works specifically with ancestors. So.
Great. Yeah, I know that it's originally from Mexico and perhaps Polynesia, but mostly kind of Central America. But that's, yeah, all I know. Wonderful. I'll love to hear
And such
more.
a good point that a plant can, in essence, just for us, made with a particular plant with whom we have a personal relationship that we cultivate. It can be, they can I think of it as like they reach into the records of that species in order to pull something through just for you. And it might not be what all the other essence makers would agree on this plant is about because it's made for you. It's like this is something that is reaching a part in you that's very specific, and it might not be a general a category that the rest of the essence makers would agree on.
I feel like they match crystals in that way. Like it's really difficult for crystals to go look at a book and see, because every book's going to tell you something different. Because really, that is about your relationship with that crystal. And I feel like the essences can be very much like that.
Yeah. And people use them in different ways and for different purposes. And so you meet another practitioner and they're like, I use this a lot for this purpose. And you've never heard of it before. The purpose, maybe not, maybe the essence, but not the purpose. So we all have really creative ways of coming forward with this work. Thank you for sharing your piece. Yeah, Joni.
Hi, this is my first time on a live chat too, so I'm really grateful to be here. Thank you. And I don't have clinical experience as some of you do in matching essences to other people. I just use them myself. But I had this sweet, sweet story about the power of intuition and encouraging people to follow their own path about the language of flowers. So I was working with a family that I'm close to, and the mother has 3 young children, and she had been diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. So she was going through this really intense time. And they're also a family of faith. And so I was trying to sort out how to meet them, not sharing their particular faith, but being a spiritual person, if that makes sense. And they are evangelical, and so they're very rigid ways, at least in my experience, of looking at things, and almost seems like kind of resistant to a lot of what I feel comfortable with in terms of, fairies and stuff like that. That's just can't be part of their language. So I taught them how to make flower essences through video with sweet peas, one of my favorite, pretty, happy, radiant, amazing flowers. And I was suggesting to them that at sort of trying to translate some of my processes, approaching a plant. I think of Kathleen, you sharing that story of working with I think it was Russian sage. Do you remember that story? It was so sweet.
The purple sage, possibly.
The purple sage, yeah, yeah. How, we can be a little unpersonal with it and how to get personal with it. So I would approach a plant and ask permission or some sort of feeling sensation that I was welcomed to create an essence with it. So in translating with this family, I suggested that they pray because that's their language, right? So approach the plant, pray, and ask God for guidance. And what was so sweet about this family's experience in the context of the mother being quite ill, family wanting to support them, is part of my naivete, not having a dearth of experience as many of you do, but that naivete I think can pay off. So here's what this family did that I thought was so sweet. 3 children, 2 daughters and a son, and this young son is so precocious. He's almost not even paying attention to his mother's gravity, because he's a toddler. So what they did is they created a family essence. They took out their bowl. Each one in the family was drawn to a particular flower by their experience of talking with God or angels or whatever, right? And the little boy picked the nodding onion, which I just think is so sweet because it's got a kind of a crispy scent, like it just seems so perfect. So each of the 5, including the husband, gathered up a plant, put it in the bowl, made this flower essence, and then they all took it as a family. And I just thought that is so sweet to approach it in a way that fits your particular faith or belief or worldview. And we were still having conversation with it, even though we're quite diverse. And I just thought that was so sweet. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. That's such a beautiful story and ritual for people to play with.
That's lovely. And it just shows how, nature is always wanting to help. we don't have to do it in a particular way. And you creating a circumstance and teaching them how to do something that would be a real expression of them, their beliefs, their faith, and then the children just really naturally gravitating and connecting to the healing of the flower. I'm so glad that that family found you and that you found them and were able to help them in their time of need. Isn't that beautiful that what the essences can do for us to touch us really deeply when we really need it the most?
When we talk about the learning the language of the flowers, it has been so deeply meaningful to me that when we get together as flower essence people, we learn so much from one another. And when we're part of, one of these conversations here or a whole cohort of people learning together, we actually become so much more in terms of what we begin embodying in terms of learning because of everyone that is part of the circles that are created. So
Monocultures are not stable ecosystems. We need every type, every type of being to come and populate the ecosystem for greater stability and greater richness. We all interact with one another in ways that enhance all of us and support all of us. So we have no interest in monoculture. It's beautiful to have different types of people and working in different ways, working in really different ways.
Yeah, and the story that Joannie just shared, can inspire one of us here in a somewhat similar situation. Say, whoa, I just heard that story, and this can be such a beautiful suggestion for this other situation that I meet.
And I'm sure those kids will remember it always and remember that experience and remember, that touch of nature on their hearts when they really needed it. So what a gift to offer them. Thank you for doing that. Does anyone else have a story that they'd like to share about making an essence, or when they were surprised by an essence that came up to see them? Yeah, Miriam, please.
Unmute. So I've been also part of the mentoring group, Flower Essence mentoring group. And when we met the other day, Adele was talking about using cream, and she mentioned a book which I think we had learned about when I did the last cohort, and of the fellow that puts the creams on different parts of the body. He's a acupuncturist, perhaps, or and so it occurred to me actually yesterday, because I've been doing also ancestral healing work and focusing on the maternal lineage. And I had read something about, someone shared something about their birth experience with their mother. And, I thought, I've never really gone back to that moment in, my own journey, other than doing research of that era where I was born. Women were often given what was called
Twilight sleep.
Twilight sleep, exactly. And so what I do know from my birth experience, at least I had learned years ago, is that I had been a high forceps delivered child, which means to me, and my interpretation of that is that probably my mother wasn't really able to be in the process at all. And so I thought, I really need to uh, work with this and find out, because it will connect me to a pattern, to the mothers. And so I thought, oh, and yesterday I just talked to all the essences and said, who is speaking? Who could really help with this process? And it turned out it was Star of Bethlehem. And so I mixed that in some cream that I have, and then looked up in the book the areas that would be helpful to put it on. So I did it before I went to bed last night. And so when I got up in the morning to meditate, I just went into a very deep state. And then suddenly there I was, seeing my birth and experiencing it. And what happened through the process was an amazing releasing of that energy that had gotten frozen in the trauma of that birth. It went through my body. I mean, the entire body shook, was released ultimately through my feet. And I felt like that was I was so grateful to the Star of Bethlehem to embody, to put me back in the earth, because, it was a very powerful experience. A lot of tears, a lot of releasing also in that way, and a deeper understanding of why I felt in this life like a motherless child, because at that moment, my mother was not present. And so now I'm just intrigued to learn, can I go back through the lineage and find similar patterns? And I did then see, like my first birth, our first child, a similar pattern, but not directly similar, just the similarity being I had to be induced because there was a concern about my health, but and he was taken away almost immediately. So that gives me insight to how I want to have a visit with our oldest son. And, and then from that point on, I started taking charge of my births. And so 3 children later, it changed along the way. That said, I just have to thank Ruth, you, and Kathleen, and the flowers. So thanks.
For the depth of your journey and for sharing this with us.
So beautiful that Star of Bethlehem showed up for you, and to heal something that, didn't happen last week. This has been an imprint on your entire incarnation. That these essences can get in and touch something that happened so long ago and was so formative, and to have such a profound shift. Isn't that amazing? Thank you for sharing your story. That is incredible. And now you're able to provide this gift to your next generation, right? The imprint is released, and now it doesn't have to continue on down the line. Wow. So powerful.
And what's beautiful is that the essence was holding space for all this process for you. So you didn't need extra assistance because there was this overlighting presence through that energy of the essence really holding you through it.
Thank you, Ruth, because I did really feel held by the essence. I mean, I could feel it as if it had me in its arms. So, yeah, thank you for articulating that. Because
Can,
that was, yeah.
can I do this?
June, are you trying to join us? We'd be happy to hear your voice, or maybe it's just accidental. So no worries. But wow, Miriam, thank you for entrusting
Sorry,
us.
I'm just trying to join.
Oh yes, please. Do you have a question or a thought?
No, I was just trying to write in the chat that I'm really sorry. I didn't realize the clocks had changed. So I've just jumped out of the shower to get ready for an 8 o'clock start. I'm so sorry.
Easily done. Well, we'll get the recording up just as quickly as I can manage. So you'll have to watch it in reverse. You'll get
Thank
the
you.
finale first. But
Yeah,
thanks for
there's
joining us.
usually 1 week in which the US clocks change, but the European clocks don't yet. And then, yeah, after that, we're in sync again.
Time. Flexible. We were just talking about time, weren't we? We were just talking about in essence reaching back into time. No problem. Easy peasy. Those of us are maybe a little more challenged working in this current time. Yeah. Wow.
Thanks.
I love how these conversations go in places that we don't expect and we couldn't plan for. And each one of you who's been generous enough to share a story, to share an insight, to share a question, we really are grateful for you to come and be with us in this. We really enjoy these. We really love to just see the family show up and to grow this garden of flower essence therapy that we all feel so powerfully. That it's such an important field and it's such an important way of working with healing the soul of all of us, humans and animals and environments. And it really has no limit. Ruth, would you like to share a final thought about how to learn the language of flowers?
Yeah, just re-emphasizing the fact that learning together and deepening this learning together is really a very precious experience. And so, yeah, and we, of course, love providing these spaces. So it's one of the things that we are very much dedicated to doing is to creating these spaces in which we deepen this understanding. Oh, and Kathleen had mentioned the process of images also being part of the healing. And I wanted to touch on that because way back, I remember a friend of mine from Brazil who makes her own line of essences, Sandra Epstein, and she would project the slides of a flower onto people and have people have an experience of having that image of that plant or flower being projected on them. And of course, because I am also a photographer, have learned photography early on, and I love getting close to the plants and taking their pictures. And then there's so much about the plant that reveals itself afterwards as I begin looking and immersing myself into these pictures and preparing these presentations and doing research to prepare the classes. I really find that as a very visual person that I am, that connecting with the plants through imagery is also such a special way. So, in different ways, you can do that. Of course, if you can have the actual plant in your garden or with you in your house, but if you also can have some images of the plants in different places, like I personally have Lady's Mantle at the screen of my phone, and I'm always seeing those droplets of water on the leaves of the Lady's Mantle. So that's another way for you to be connected with the plants and with their teachings. Yeah. So
Thanks
that's what I
everyone for
wanted to end
being
up
part of
with.
this, and
Yeah.
we are so sorry if you're just popping in now. We in California changed our time. We in the US changed our time this last week, and possibly your country didn't. So we will be putting this up on the YouTube channel, and we'll send out an email with the link. Apologies, and we're glad that you joined us even just for a moment. And if you have a suggestion of a new topic or another topic that you would like to chat about, why don't you let us know? hello@floweressencestudies.com. We would love to hear it, and we would love to have a conversation about it. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.